The first time I ever saw an email message was 1995. I was about halfway through my graduate program in English. I was studying 18th century British literature, and somebody told me that I had an email account now. So I asked them what that meant, and they showed me, and I looked at it, and I played with it for a few minutes, and I said, "That's nice. I suppose there are some fun things you can do with this, but it's never going to become a serious communications tool." I said that. I was wrong. In the next 15 years or so, email has become one of the major ways that we communicate in business. It's changed the whole landscape. It's made communications possible in different ways. It's made it possible to send large files, video files, sound files, whole books with the immediacy that we used to reserve for a phone call. Email has been a great blessing, but it's also come at a cost. There are some things we need to be aware of when we're using email in a business setting. This podcast is primarily about those things, primarily about the ways that email can become a handicap if you aren't careful, pitfalls in email communication. Email is an aggregating technology. That is to say, it doesn't so much promote new ways of communication. It bundles together ways that we used to communicate through old media. For example, it has a lot of characteristics of a letter. It's written, you can think about what you're saying, you can revise what you're saying, you can proofread what you're saying. It also has a lot of the characteristics of a phone call because it's immediate. You get the message across instantly, you get a response instantly, and it also does what a fax machine used to do. It can send large documents. It can send video and sound files, as we've said, duplicating what televisions and radios used to do. All of this can go through an email message from one user to another, vastly changing the way that we work. Email is also tricky because it's easy to distribute well beyond its original audience. Once you send something off into cyberspace, you don't know where it's going to end up, which is much different than a telephone call unless you happen to be a member of the mob or under investigation for some reason that your phone could be tapped. But an email message I can forward, I can copy a lot of people on a reply, and you don't know where what you say is going to end up. And time after time after time after time, I have seen this come back to haunt people. And it's even worse than that because the record that is preserved is not entirely reliable. It's very easy to change an email message or to cut out part of it and only forward the part that makes you look the worst. So email creates a permanent but not necessarily accurate record. So it's a form of communication that has to be treated with some degree of intentionality and forethought. In my opinion, the most potentially problematic thing about email is that it removes most of the contextual cues that we rely on to make sense out of context. It removes a whole lot of what we as human beings use to attribute connotations to people's communication. Even though it has the immediacy of speech, it happens instantly, it strips away facial gestures, body movement, tone of voice, inflections, rising syllables, falling syllables, rhythms, all of these things which communicate almost as much to meaning as the words do themselves. That means that it's very difficult to detect irony, sarcasm, humor, and a lot of other things in email that it's pretty easy to detect when you're having a conversation, either in person or, to a somewhat lesser extent, over the telephone. Email also makes it difficult for you to read somebody's reactions because even though you're writing and they're going to read it immediately, you don't see their facial gestures. You don't hear their tone of voice, their body movements. And very often we watch what people are doing while we're talking and we modify our communication when we get feedback in the form of nonverbal cues. Email doesn't allow us to do this, which means that you have to think about email differently than you do either vocal or face-to-face conversations where you have access to these non-verbal or non-specifically denotative cues. Also, it's different than the letter because of its immediacy. So let's watch Professor Flagbag once again and one of his students go through what is a somewhat exaggerated but really fairly typical escalation of email conflicts, and let's identify some of the places where this series of emails goes astray.
Dear Professor Flagbag, I don't really understand what you meant by I need a stronger thesis in my comparison-contrast paper. I thought my thesis statement was pretty good. There are many differences between avocados and the French Revolution. One is a green vegetable and the other one was a civil war. What's wrong with that? I don't think it is fair that I spent twice as long on this paper as my roommate, and got a lower grade. Signed, Brady.
Dear Brady, I am not sure what your parents were thinking when they told you that life was supposed to be fair. What a horrible thing to teach a child. If you learn nothing else in my class, you will learn the incomparably valuable lesson that life is indeed not fair. I am joking, of course. LOL. As for your paper, when I said that you needed a stronger thesis statement, what I meant was that you need to think of something better to write about. Your comparison needs to be motivated by some sort of logical connection between ideas, and, I'm afraid, that avocados and the French Revolution just does not cut it. And besides, avocados are a fruit and not a vegetable, and the French Revolution was not really a civil war. Come by during my office hours, and we can work on developing some real ideas. Sincerely, Professor Reginald Flagbag.
Professor Flagbag, why do you have to insult my parents? What did I ever say about you? Everyone else says that your arms look like gorillas and your head is too big for your body, but I was just asking for help on my paper. Can't you even think of one thing about it that you like? I worked really hard on it, and I like the way it turned out. Clearly you don't. Signed, Brady.
Dear Brady, I do apologize for my little joke. I did not mean to insult your parents. Nonetheless, I really don't think the size of my head or my arms is at issue in this discussion. What is at issue is the fact that you are trying to write a paper that compares two things that have nothing to do with each other: avocados and the French Revolution. I don't think I have seen a sillier paper topic in the 30 years that I have been teaching overprivileged, undereducated children at this university. Good luck on your paper. You shall need it.
You know what? Forget this. I don't need this crap. I pay a lot of money to be at this school, and I deserve some respect. Tomorrow, I am going to drop your class and tell everybody what a lousy teacher you are. Then I am going to talk to the dean. Beam me up, Scotty. I'm done with Planet Flagbag.
Dear Brady, I will miss your razor-sharp wit in class and these fantastic late-night email exchanges. But one must do what one must do. Give my best to the dean. And remember, 10U means never having to say you sorry.
So what do you think? Did you detect all the errors? I've been doing this for a long time. I've been teaching for 20 years and emailing students for 15, and even though I exaggerated a little bit in the script of this mini-drama, most of these situations are ones that I've encountered either in my own emails or in those of a colleague that I was supervising or somehow interacting with. I have just 6 large areas I want to talk about where I think most of our email communications, when they go wrong because of one of these things. Sarcasm and potentially offensive humor. We're an ironic people. Human beings love irony, and Americans in the 21st century seem to love it a lot. And when we're talking with each other, we can use nonverbal cues, as I said before, to deflect the sarcasm. But those are absent in email. Even when you try to add a smiley face or an LOL, you still don't have the full range of nonverbal softening of sarcasm or potentially offensive humor that you have when you're speaking face-to-face or on the phone. Stay away from sarcasm. And that's hard for me to say. I love sarcasm. It's one of my main modes of being. But in email messages, you have to try to limit anything that could potentially be offensive. Unnecessary criticism. It was completely valid that Professor Flagbag told Brady that a thesis statement comparing avocados to the French Revolution really wasn't going to work. That's not a good thesis statement. But he didn't have to, after saying that, go on and tell him that avocados were a fruit and not a vegetable. That was just rubbing it in. That was, look how smart I am. And it leads to defensiveness. I have seen so many email communications and series of email communications become very ugly very fast because somebody interprets something in a way that makes him or her defensive, and they act like we are mammals. Human beings are mammals, and we have a fight or flight reflex, and when we feel attacked, we put up a fight. We start hissing and screaming, metaphorically speaking. Personal insults. This usually happens after an email communication has escalated a level. People start insulting each other, getting digs in, reminding people of things that happened at some point, or otherwise making what should be a professional communication personal. Threats. Other than being just ugly and mean, threats limit your action. If you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, then you look even worse. So when you threaten that you're going to withdraw from a class, you almost have to do it, even if that's not the best thing for you. And finally, and I cannot emphasize this enough, EWA, emailing while angry. Don't do it. Never, ever, ever. Count to 10, count to 100, go to sleep and wake up the next morning. Just don't send email when you're feeling mad, because the immediacy of email combined with the lack of interaction of email will almost always produce results that you don't want to have to live with.